Hi, I'm Gretchen from Retreat House. Welcome. I'm really excited to be here with one of the House of Courage authors, Sherry Ward. And Sherry, I'm sure the people that are tuning into this video are curious, how did you get connected to Retreat House?
Well, I had known Lil from probably 2012 through the Spiritual Ministries Institute. She would often present, and then as time went on, I heard that she was had this vision of retreat house, a retreat facility, spirituality center. And so I made it known that I was extremely interested in that and pleased to let me know. Well, in the meanwhile, I moved from the mid cities to Richardson and then was 5 minutes from Retreat House. So within a few months, Retreat House had opened, and I got to be a part of that. So I was thrilled. I said, not only did I move, but I got to do this too. I mean, it was just wonderful. And I loved every moment of our time in the house, and I look forward to doing that again.
Yes, instead of the Zoom retreat center.
Well, Zoom Retreat Center is better than no retreat center.
Absolutely. And I know this is our sixth House of book, and you've contributed beautiful stories and poetries to all the volumes. Have you always been a writer? Is this something that was a more recent thing?
I think I've always loved like writing things down or collecting little quotes or thinking about them. But probably within the last 20 years, I've been more dedicated to actually journaling. And then out of that journaling often comes to mind something, oh, I could write more about that.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. Well, speaking of that, we're now going to invite Sherry to read her story called A Man Named Frank. So I turn over the Zoom platform to you, Sherry.
All right, thank you. Let me tell you a story of one man's incredible, courageous journey that has affected my life since we first met. This story begins in the summer of 1958. I was a 19-year-old student nurse at a rehabilitation center in Santa Monica, California. My fellow students and I lived in the dormitory there for 3 months to learn to care for people with various physical limitations. The majority of the patients who came to the center had a spinal cord injury or other nervous system disorders. One sunny morning, I went into Frank's room for the first time. I had read Frank's chart. I knew that he was 43 years old when the accident occurred, and he was now 44. Mm. He had been at the rehab center for almost a year. Mm. He knew more tricks of the trade there than I did at this point in time, and so he was a very willing teacher for me. He was paralyzed from the neck down, a quadriplegic, quad for short. This married man and father of 4 children was on his way to work one morning when a man in another car blew through a stop sign at a high rate of speed and hit Frank's car broadside on the driver's side. Frank was making a very long, hard journey back from the jaws of death to being up in a wheelchair for several hours each day. I fed him his meals and gave him his medications. Frank communicated with his family and friends through old-fashioned letters. At first, Frank was dictating letters, and those of us who cared for him wrote down his words. Having typed before the accident, Frank was anxious to do that again. Over time, with massage and exercises, Frank had regained some use of his upper extremities, limited though it was. On one of his family's visits, they brought his portable typewriter, Oh, such rejoicing. The next day, all the staff was hard at work trying to figure out the best path to success. Remember, it was 1958, and we improvised a lot. The solution that worked the best was padding and taping each index finger to an unsharpened #2 wooden pencil. Eraser ends down so that the non-skid surface made contact with the typewriter key. Frank had infinite patience and tenacity. I don't know if anyone kept track of the number of letters Frank wrote, but keystroke by laborious keystroke, Frank typed letters to the newspaper, to his elected officials, and anyone who would listen to the things that were important to him. And when my time at Santa Monica was concluded, Frank was still hard at work with his letters. He had a purpose. He was a gifted communicator and a man of great faith. He was my encourager over the remaining years of my nursing education. He would frequently quote helpful scripture in his letters to me. And when my class graduated, Frank sent a telegram congratulating us on our achievement. That was an extravagance for him. And I kept that bright yellow Western Union telegram with some of my other treasure mementos until a few years ago when I donated it to my School of Nursing's archive. Now in 1968, I got one more chance to see Frank when my husband and our little girls and I were returning from Hawaii following my husband's service in the United States Navy at Pearl Harbor. Frank was then at Loma Linda, California, at a long-term care rehabilitation center. He was thrilled to see us and meet my family. He was now nearer his family and they could visit him more often. He was a grandfather. His smile was intact. His typewriter keys still clacking away. Even after all these years, I think of this physically challenged man who was up against almost insurmountable odds. He had the courage to try, fail, and always to try again, and be grateful for each small success that came his way. I give God thanks for putting a man named Frank in my path and for his many lessons in courage and overcoming impossible odds on this journey we call life.
Oh, Sherry, as always, that is just such a beautiful, I feel like I'm wrapped in this big hug. And to witness other people's courage is such a gift. I'm wondering, do you have a sense of what it was that gave Frank the courage to keep going instead of giving up?
I really think it was his great faith and his family's ongoing support. As I say, this was 1958. People didn't fly places. It was a big undertaking for the family even to drive. I think it was maybe 50 or 60 miles away that they lived. And that the faithfulness of his family and his strong faith in God. And when I say I walked into his room one sunny morning, I still see that. I see that in my head. And I see this man who's in a wheelchair and basically inert, with this big smile on his face. And he trained many a student nurse in the time that we had our program going through there, because he saw a lot of us and he taught a lot of us.
And how would you define courage? How does courage play out in your own life?
I think courage is when you have fear, you don't run from it, you walk through it. Mm-hmm. And God is the great encourager. And this man named Frank was an encourager in that part of my life. And his memory encourages still.
Thank you so much for sharing the story of Frank. It's just sort of overcome with how, Frank has probably passed away, and yet he lives on in your memory, and now he lives on for all of us in the story you've told. And the lessons he taught you become lessons that we can also carry with us in our own journey. So thank you so very much for that. And we can't wait to see what you contribute in the next House of Book.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.